Alright guys, boxing gossip here on a Monday night. Hope everyone's doing well. I was away this weekend, so this is my video kind of reacting to some of the weekend's news and some of the big fights from the weekend. We're going to start, obviously, Anthony Crolla versus Jorge Linares. Jorge Linares victorious again. Was it repeat or revenge? I'm afraid it was a repeat. All three judges scored it to Jorge Linares by 118 to 109, and realistically that was about the right scorecard. Jorge Linares very dominant throughout the course of the fight, proved to be far the superior operator. Scored knockdown in the 7th round, so got 1-10-8 round, and you know, really showed a gap in class between himself and Anthony Crolla. Jorge Linares, someone I've rated in this channel for a while. You know, someone who proved himself to be an elite fighter. You know, when I talked about this fight in the build-up, I said, you know, there are some rematches where you can see a result going a different way, and I kind of said I didn't really see why there was any reason to believe that the result in this fight would be any different to the result in the first fight. I didn't actually see the first fight as a very close fight whatsoever. Now, I know the scorecards were slightly more competitive in that first fight, but I thought those scorecards were very charitable to Anthony Crolla, and I must admit I didn't see the first fight as close in any way. So it was a bit of a surprise for me to see Eddie Hearn and see Anthony Crolla take this rematch straight away, because I couldn't really work out what they were planning to do differently. You know, I didn't necessarily see any controversy from the first fight, and I kind of was wondering what they were going to bring to the table that was going to be so different, what, you know, edits and adaptations Anthony Crolla was going to bring to his game that was, you know, going to mean the fight was ending in a different result the first time round. And unfortunately, Anthony Crolla seemed to bring the same game that he usually brings. He fought a typical Anthony Crolla fight in a typical Joe Gallagher fighter fashion, and Jorge Linares, if anything, actually improved from the pretty fantastic performance he put on first time round. And it really was a very one-sided fight. Now, the first round, it was a bit of a feel-out round. I maybe edged the first round to Crolla tentatively, although, you know, even perhaps that was a bit charitable. But from the second round onwards, Jorge Linares took over really with his boxing. The Linares jab and move game was really on point. Crolla came in, high guard, tucked up tight, wanted to walk Linares down. So what did Linares do? He did the exact thing you should do in that situation. He got on his bike, he looked to keep distance, keep range, and he peppered Crolla with the jab. You know, Crolla was holding a nice tight high guard, so Linares would touch him to the head and touch him low to the body. You know, and the body work of Linares, really good. The jab to the body reminded me sometimes of, you know, obviously very different kind of fighter, but the way he was having effect with almost that like telescopic jab shooting to the body reminded me of the way Floyd Mayweather used to throw that at times. And, you know, the hand speed, the snap in the Linares jab was, you know, really good. I thought Linares, you know, started to warm up to the fight even more going into like the 3rd and 4th rounds, and you know, we started to see Linares throwing a lot of power punches. You know, Crolla was maintaining that high guard throughout the course of the fight, so Linares would maybe go 1-2 to the head, you know, almost just to keep Crolla's guard high, and then he'd drop and pivot and, you know, put a beautifully planted hook into Crolla's body and really bank that body work against Anthony Crolla. So Linares' work was very impressive, and Linares is a guy who showed really superior attributes to Anthony Crolla. The speed from Linares was really impressive. You know, Linares is a guy, he must have had 45 odd fights in his career, maybe closest to 50 fights in his career now. The hand speed is still there even in his 30s. The foot speed is still there even in his 30s. He's very fast. He puts punches together very well in terms of combinations. The jab is on point. He's got excellent head movement and upper body movement. You know, if you see Jorge Linares moving back on his back foot, his head's moving, his upper body's moving, you know, everything's moving. He's almost going back like this, you know. He makes it a very difficult target to hit. And Crolla really, you know, I've got a lot of time for Anthony Crolla. I met Anthony Crolla, top guy. Crolla looked a bit one-dimensional against him. You know, Crolla plodded forward with that high guard. He seemed out of ideas. He really did seem out of ideas. You know, he tried to walk he tried to walk Jorge Linares down, but he was really doing it just by coming forward. You know, he didn't adapt at all. You know, what was bizarre is Linares appeared to me to be the taller, scopier guy in there. Yet it was Linares who was the one who was getting low. You know, a few times in this fight, you can see Jorge Linares duck under punches, whereas Anthony Crolla, who's the short guy, you'd think he'd be trying to adopt almost like a Joe Fraser style, trying to get low, trying to bob under punches, and, you know, trying to pull the presser and that sort of thing. I watched the video Ultratech Sports did, and he was referring to Ricky Hatton, and I thought that was a very, very good comparison from Ultratech Sports. You know, Anthony Crolla could have done, you know, could have had a look at some Ricky Hatton and, you know, tried to adopt that kind of get low, bob and weave, create angles and build a presser that way. But, you know, Anthony Crolla looked, as I say, a bit one-dimensional in there. And, you know, another comment Ultratech Sports made that I have to agree with is the lack of head movement from Crolla. And that was, you know, exacerbated by the amount of uppercuts that were coming from Jorge Linares. And, you know, these were uppercuts in sort. These were long uppercuts from range. These were uppercuts where we threw a jab and then came up with an uppercut. I mean, if you guys are down the gyms, next time you're on a bag, you know, you try and throw that combination, jab and then uppercut. Very, very, very awkward. You know, Linares was throwing unorthodox punches and he was throwing them with such snap. You know, such sting behind them. For me, it really, really impressed me. And, you know, Crolla's lack of head movement, the fact that Crolla was just coming straight forward, he wasn't getting low, he wasn't dipping, he wasn't giving angles, he was literally just trudging forward. He was eating a hell of a lot of leather. And really, he was picked off in there. He was picked off by the superior technician, the superior athlete, the superior puncher, the more versatile fighter. I'd be fascinated to know what Crolla and Gallagher's tactics were to win this fight, because, you know, you'd think they'd maybe come up with some sort of a game plan, but I thought the first fight showed enough that Crolla just walking forward, putting on pressure in the manner with which he was doing wasn't enough to get the win over Linares. So I was kind of surprised to see them just doing it again and being picked off in the same way, if not a hell of a lot worse, to be honest. So yeah. A fairly one-sided fight and a class performance from Jorge Linares. You know, a lot of people out there are saying Jorge Linares versus Mikey Garcia for the #1 at lightweight, and most people I hear are picking Mikey Garcia to win that matchup. Now, I can see why. I guess Mikey Garcia would be perceived as being the fresher of the two. I guess he'd be perceived as being maybe the bigger puncher of the two. And I'm not saying I'd necessarily pick against Mikey Garcia in that fight. I think Mikey Garcia would have legitimate claims to be the favourite in that fight. And, you know, I can make a very strong case for Mikey Garcia to win that fight. What I will say is Linares, the form he was on last night, you know, Linares is not an easy guy for any man in that weight class. You know, don't expect Mikey Garcia just to walk through Linares, because Linares, for me, looked like a guy who had a, you know, a real set of skills. You know, I'm not going to call him a complete fighter, but if you look at the attributes that a fighter needs in order to be a complete fighter, let's say Linares has a majority of them as a minimum. And, you know, he's an awkward guy. He's extremely swift. He's got a great jab. He works to the body well. He's got a great uppercut. You know, he's a very, very well-rounded fighter. So Linares Garcia, I'm not saying that I'm necessarily picking against Mikey Garcia in that fight. Understand why he's favourite. But, you know, that for me is a very, very intriguing matchup, and that's a fight I would really, really, really like to see. You know, the winner of that fight for me would have a very, very strong claim to be included, you know, in the elite of the pound-for-pound list. Let's say top 5 of the pound-for-pound, because they are two exceptional fighters. They really are. Let's hope that fight gets made. Let's hope that fight gets made. You know, I think it's a realistic possibility. Linares has, let's face it, he's been brought over as the opponent for Anthony Crolla twice. He was brought over for the opponent for Kevin Mitchell. So he's a guy who's a bit of a warrior. You know, he will go to fights as the away fighter. He will turn up and look to upset the apple cart. So, yeah, maybe if the money's behind Mikey Garcia, Linares, you know, is the kind of guy who will show up and take that fight and yet again look to upset a home fighter. And maybe he will do. Maybe he will do. It'll be a fascinating fight if it does happen. As for Anthony Crolla, where does he go from here is an interesting question. just seen an interview with Frank Warren on the Box Nation channel, Box Nation YouTube channel, where Frank Warren's saying that Terry Flanagan fight may not actually be there for Anthony Crolla anymore. I'm not 100% sure I buy that. I actually think that Anthony Crolla is probably the biggest realistic fight available to Terry Flanagan. And Frank was saying if the fight were to happen, it would have to happen on Box Nation. And yeah, I don't know whether Eddie Hearn would allow that, but it's not impossible because Crolla is coming off back-to-back losses. And it's not impossible that Hearn would say, you know, your chance to fight for a world title, we'll let you fight on Box Nation. Crolla's kind of an interesting fighter for Eddie Hearn because Crolla's not a pay-per-view fighter. I don't actually believe that Crolla Flanagan is even a pay-per-view fight on Sky because Crolla's coming off back-to-back losses, and you know, Terry Flanagan, whilst he's a very good fighter, he's got literally no profile at all, if we're honest. So Crolla's kind of this fighter in between. You know, he's probably Eddie Hearn's, I'm probably going to be wrong when I say this, but let's say he's one of Eddie Hearn's biggest names who isn't a pay-per-view fighter. And you know, the cost of putting Anthony Crolla on a Sky Saturday night card, certainly against opponents like Jorge Linares and Terry Flanagan, I would perceive to be a lot higher cost than the normal expenditure that goes into a Sky Sports Saturday night card. Now, don't get me wrong, Crolla's obviously got a big following. He sells a lot of tickets, so I'm sure he generates some income. But yeah, maybe, just maybe, Eddie Hearn would allow that. And if the Anthony Crolla story is to continue, you know, if the Anthony Crolla legend and about how he's, you know, come back from this incident with the burglars and, you know, upset the apple cart against Barroso and Darlis Perez, and you know, if they really want to continue with that and, you know, keep marketing Anthony Crolla as one of the best lightweights in the world, perhaps he can take a step back. Perhaps he can have an 8-rounder, get a win under his belt, and then go again and have one last attempt at being a world champion against Terry Flanagan, and maybe that will have to be on Box Nation. You know, I think that's an interesting fight if it does happen. It's a fight that would create a lot of interest, especially in the Manchester scene. Two top lightweights within one city, so be a really intriguing fight. You know, Terry Flanagan, by all accounts, ticket sales for his next fight haven't gone overly well, especially if you listen to Eddie Hearn. So I don't know how the financials for that fight would stack up on Box Nation, you know, because it's not a pay-per-view fight. I know that BT Sports are bringing some revenue, but you know, with Terry Flanagan's lack of profile, it's just kind of hard to understand if that fight is going to generate the money necessary to make it happen. Because you know, clearly there's a lot of politics involved. One of the guys would have to fight on their rival promoters, so one of the guys would have to fight for a different broadcaster, and you just wonder if there's enough money there to make the fight happen. But for me, that's Crolla's most realistic chance of getting a world title again. He's certainly not beating Linares in a trilogy, not that that would happen. He's certainly not beating Mikey Garcia, so you know, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. I guess that's one opportunity for Anthony Crolla if he decides to take that opportunity. You know, I guess his career could go the other way. Eddie Hearn's got a lot of fighters in his stable. I've heard some whispers about him fighting Ricky Burns at £140 if Ricky Burns is to be successful with Julius Indongo. Again, obviously, Crolla's going to need to rebuild, maybe have an 8-rounder and get a win under his belt, because very hard to fight for a world title off 2 back-to-back losses. But you know, Burns is a guy, I don't think Crolla's a 140 fighter by any stretch. Mind you, I don't think Burns is a 140 fighter really, but you know, Crolla's a small, in my opinion, for 135. So up at 140, I think he'd really struggle. But Burns is a guy who's in, you know, you could perceive to be in the autumn of his career, and you know, is potentially a beatable guy. We've seen him in very tough fights against the likes of Kirill Relic, Ray Beltran. You know, he's taken 1 or 2 beatings along the way. Not absolute beatings, but he's been in very tough fights. So, yeah, maybe Crolla could come again and fight Ricky Burns. The Luke Campbell fight is an obvious fight. Ultratech Sports mentioned that in his video, and I totally agree with him that I'd pick Luke Campbell to beat Anthony Crolla. In fact, I'd probably pick Luke Campbell to stop Anthony Crolla. You know, Luke Campbell's not the kind of guy I'd trust with my mortgage. I think he's he's a guy whose performances have perhaps lacked the consistency you look for in the elite top level boxers. But Campbell's a very good fighter. He's a very big guy at the weight. He hits very hard. He's obviously got that Olympic gold medal amateur pedigree, and I think that'd be a very tough fight for Anthony Crolla. Perhaps Eddie Hearn would be inclined to make the fight, because if he believes Crolla is coming to the end, it's a fight where he could use Crolla's name and Crolla's established brand, if you like, to turn Luke Campbell into a much bigger name. And a win in a big fight night for Luke Campbell over Anthony Crolla would perhaps turn Luke Campbell into a guy on the verge of fighting for a world title, and perhaps create a lot more hype around the Luke Campbell name and the Luke Campbell brand than there is now. So that's a fight that I can see being made. The Ricky Burns fight is, it's a fight that I could see both guys taking, and it's a fight that I guess could be marketed, especially by a guy like Eddie Hearn, into being a big fight that would, generate a lot of interest. So I guess Eddie Hearn's got big options for Crolla inside his own stable. And, as I've talked about Terry Flanagan, Flanagan's a very good fighter, but we've got to be honest, even the most ardent Box Nation fan has to be honest and say this guy's profile is on the floor. And I just wonder, I think for a fight of that magnitude to be made, there's got to be serious money involved, given the politics, and given the fact that either Eddie or Frank Warren's going to have to take a massive blow by letting one of their names go and fight for a rival. So I just wonder, with Flanagan being the established champion, with Crolla being on back-to-back losses, but Flanagan not necessarily having the ticket sales and the celebrity behind him to generate that huge income, I just wonder if that realistically is going to happen. But it would certainly be a fantastic fight if it were to happen. And I think realistically, if Crolla is very serious about returning to being a world champion in the lightweight division, he's got to take that fight. I think if he starts taking fights against Ricky Burns, if he starts taking fights against Luke Campbell, he's going in another direction, and he's going in a direction of looking to get paydays rather than necessarily looking to be a world champion's lightweight. So it'd be interesting to see how they rebuild. But let's get one thing straight. If Crolla were to take a third loss in a row, be that against a guy like Luke Campbell, it would probably be time to start considering your options. Crolla's got such a story already, and he's been involved in a few big fights. He's got some, good nights to remember. I know he's only relatively young. I think he might be 30 years old. But, he's not a guy you'd want to see taking too many hidings in there, because that was a tough fight against Jorge Linares. I'm going to pause for 1 second here, start again talking about some of the undercard in just a second. So let's talk about the undercard, and I guess the obvious place to start is with Brian Rose versus Jack Arnfield. And I've got to say, this wasn't the greatest fight. If you're looking for a sort of blood and guts action, fight of the year contender, I'm afraid you're going to have to look elsewhere. Opening 6 rounds of the fight were very, very tentative. Both guys trying to work from range. Very low volume. There was kind of a hesitancy to engage. And both guys really having a look at each other. Maybe because they've done a lot of sparring. I think one of the Sky commentators speculated on this, because they'd sparred a lot together. They were kind of aware of what the other guy brought to the table, and as a result, it was maybe a bit more cat and mouse. I was actually slightly disappointed in the performance of Jack Arnfield in this fight, because if you guys saw in my pre-fight prediction, I thought Arnfield would win the fight comfortably, and he did win the fight, and he won the fight. I don't want to say he won it comfortably, because that'd be overstating it, but he won the fight. But I thought he'd prove quite a bit superior to Brian Rose at this stage of Brian Rose's career. Rose is a guy from the division below who's been in a lot of wars over the years. But yeah, Armfield kind of fell over the line a bit, which was a bit disappointing. The judges had it 115, 113, 115, 113, and 116, 112, all in favour of Armfield. I agreed with the majority of the judges. I had it 115, 113 to Arnfield. And what I thought was frustrating about this fight is Arnfield was the guy who was the natural middleweight. Arnfield was the guy who was the much bigger guy. Arnfield was the guy with the jab. But Arnfield never really committed to his jab. He actually was a bit sloppy with the jab. he pulled at the jab a lot. He never really stuck it out there like a battering ram. He never really committed to it. And I think that was really necessary against a smaller guy who was looking to box him from range. And I actually thought Arnfield was a bit sloppy with it at times. You know, how many times did he throw that jab and Rose sort of pulled back and countered him with a straight right? I mean, Rose was countering on that jab time and time again, and Rose was able to land fairly repeatedly on Jack Arnfield in response to Arnfield throwing out that jab lazily and not bringing it back to his chin. Yeah, if Arnfield was in with a puncher, he may well have got found out in that fight. Yeah, I thought Arnfield had the most dominant portion of the fight between rounds 7 to 9. You know, I thought Arnfield won those 3 rounds well, but really what he did in those rounds is come forward and, you know, bully Rose by using his size. He kind of adopted almost like a presser fighter mentality in those 3 rounds. You know, he was a stronger, younger, more physical guy, and he sort of came forward, tried to work the body, tried to throw hooks, tried to throw uppercuts, and almost bullied the natural light middleweight Brian Rose in there. And don't get me wrong, that was relatively effective, but there's no way Arnfield, the way he fights, you know, he's a rangy jabber mover. Those sort of tactics are not going to be effective as he steps up in class against genuine middleweights. And I was a bit disappointed he couldn't establish his dominance from the outside and establish his dominance, you know, behind the boxing. And that he had to resort to using sort of big man techniques in there. As for Brian Rose, you'd have to speculate that this may potentially be the end of his career. He looked... I don't think he was ever a middleweight, and I think he looked like he'd lost a step in there for me. Brian Rose of old, he used to have a decent set of legs. He used to be able to move around the ring. He used to be able to dance and create a bit of space. I kind of felt like he'd lost that. He was still countering well. He still had a bit of hand speed behind his counters. You know, he's not completely overboiled, but I did kind of feel that he'd lost a step. And the performance Armfield put in tonight, on the weekend, that Brian Rose of 2 or 3 years ago would have probably still had enough to beat him. You know, but that's faded now, and I just wonder whether Brian Rose's best days are behind him. As for Armfield, I think he needs to commit to the jab fully. You know, that essentially is his greatest attribute. He's a very, very big guy, a very rangy middleweight, and I think he really needs to, you know, dedicate himself to throwing that, and when he throws it, sort of stepping in behind it and, you know, really committing to it. I just felt that Armfield was getting countered a bit too much, you know, I felt he was relying too much on shortening up his punches and bullying rather than doing what he could have done. You know, Armfield's an interesting fighter. He's someone who's got wins now over John Ryder, Brian Rose, Mick Hall, and he enters a domestic middleweight mix that's actually quite live. You know, you've got guys like Craig Cunningham, Anthony Ogogo, who'll be returning, Spike O'Sullivan, Tommy Langford if he were to lose to Kurt Cedars, Adam Etches, Tom Doran, Lee Markham. You know, there's a lot of names in that middleweight division domestically, and you know, Arnfield could be one of the better names there. I also quite like the look of Craig Cunningham. Yeah, I think he's a good fighter. But yeah, I thought Arnfield made tougher work than he should have done. I thought Arnfield was a guy who could potentially go on and win a British title and maybe have 1 or 2 fights at European level. But I'm not so sure if his upside is that high, having seen this fight. I thought he was getting countered too much, and I'm just not sure the style he showed against Brian Rose would translate well to a guy who was at a slightly higher level. Not the biggest thriller. I've got to admit, I did do a boxing betting video about a week ago now, and in that video I said that my bet for the night would be a double. Jorge Linares to beat Anthony Crolla, and Jack Arnfield to beat Brian Rose. And yeah, I did collect. I got about 7-4 on that double. So I hope there's 1 or 2 of you out there who took the advice. You know, I've got enough of them wrong over the years that I've got to take some credit when I pick one right. So yeah, hopefully I wasn't the only one on that double. But yeah, fair play to Jack Arnfield, but not the greatest performance. He gets the win, and I guess he can get involved in a fight with another one of those names I mentioned earlier on in the video. You know, that kind of domestic middleweight scene is live enough. Marcus Morrison took an absolute hiding on the undercard from Jason Wellborn. It's kind of a fight that you don't really see too regularly, because more often when they're, when you've got a young prospect like Marcus Morrison, you'd think the coach would pull him out. And Tony Bellew was urging Gallagher to pull out Marcus Morrison from, the 5th or 6th round, really, as early as that. He was taking a real beating in there, and you wonder if that did shorten Marcus Morrison's career, the amount of extra punches and the extra punishment he took in there against Jason Wellborn. I had a look at Marcus Morrison on BoxRec. I've seen him box a few times before, but never against any opposition. I had a look on BoxRec, and I think of his 14 fights, only something like 2 or 3 of them were against opponents with winning records. He really did have a very, very padded record. And Jason Wellborn, he was a guy that you would suspect Morrison to beat. Wellborn's competed as low as welterweight, if I'm not mistaken, whereas Morrison's a middleweight. And Wellborn had tended to lose whenever he fought at that kind of English to British style level before. But yeah, he really put a hiding on Morrison, and it was a fairly unpleasant beatdown. It was actually not too comfortable to watch in the last round. So yeah, Marcus Morrison, can he come again? He's a young guy. It's his first loss. He can perhaps go and rebuild, but that to me looked like a loss that will be pretty hard to come back from, because he took an absolute beating in there, and it's not a fight that you'd necessarily pick him to win in a rematch against Jason Wellborn. Wellborn for me proved to be far superior man, and you're going to think that any guy who's in the ring with Marcus Morrison in future is going to look at that footage and back themselves to have similar success to what Wellborn had in there. So yeah, that was a fight that a lot of people have talked about. Following on from this, due to the nature of the beatdown that Marcus Morrison suffered, unfortunately. I'm trying to think what else I can tell you about. Martin Ward fought Maxi Hughes. I didn't watch that fight, but I'm a bit frustrated with Martin Ward's career. Like, he's kind of this guy who's feels like he's been at sort of English-British level for some time, and this was a trilogy against Maxi Ward. I know they drew the first time round, but usually boxing trilogies happen due to massive public demand to see a third fight. Usually boxing trilogies happen like when there's a huge amount of controversy, or it's one each and it's a big story. Martin Ward versus Maxi Hughes is not necessarily the trilogy that I was asking Father Christmas for last December, let's put it that way. But Ward's won again. I've seen Ward box a few times. I was ringside for his fight with Ronnie Clark, and he's certainly got attributes. He's got amateur pedigree, as you know, he's just a guy, you wonder what kind of upside does he have. I mean, he seems to almost be stagnating, and I kind of wonder whether the best thing for him may be to put him in a bigger fight, even a fight against like a guy like Stephen Smith, or someone of that nature, and just see if he sinks or swims, because at the minute he isn't the biggest. I can't imagine he's the biggest ticket seller. He's not the biggest name, and you just wonder what benefit. Like, he can't be earning a huge amount of money. He's not building his celebrity with fights against guys like Maxi Hughes in the trilogy. You just kind of think like he's kind of scraping through this level of opposition. I think he's got 2 draws, and he always seems to make tougher work than he should. You just wonder, maybe boxing him at a higher level could either bring out the best in him, or show that he is a guy with a limited upside. But it's another one, who amongst us is queuing up to watch Martin Ward's next 12th rounder against a Southern area or English level opponent? It's just a career that for me is becoming frustrating, and when I see him fighting on undercards, given the current level of opponent, I tend to almost want to give it a swerve, being brutally honest. Lawrence Okolie fought on the undercard. I believe bizarrely his fight wasn't televised, which isn't really the debut you dream of for an Olympian turning pro. But Lawrence Okolie won against a guy who had 2 fights and 2 losses, and he knocked him out brutally inside 20 seconds. Okolie is obviously a guy who's been very well regarded from the Olympic setup. There's all sorts of rumours that he knocked out Anthony Joshua in sparring. There's rumours that everyone at the minute has knocked out Anthony Joshua in sparring. I've heard 3 or 4 names that allegedly have dropped Anthony Joshua in sparring. I can't believe they're all true. So who knows what the story is there. But Okolie is clearly a guy who's going to be managed. I understand that his next fight is potentially on the Ricky Burns card in April, when Burns is fighting Ndongo. So we should see him out again in 2 or 3 weeks, and fairly swiftly. And to be honest, the 20-second workout he had in this particular fight won't do anything to stop him from fighting again very, very swiftly. But yeah, clearly Okolie showed that he had enough to overwhelm a two-fight, two-loss fighter inside a few seconds, and you'd probably expect that from a guy with Olympic pedigree. But we're not going to learn anything until he faces someone who is either a bit more durable or has a bit more ring experience. Potentially, even a guy like Moses Matovu, one of these journeymen who's just been around for years and years and years and has got so much experience. A guy like that, you'd probably learn more fighting a guy like that than just sparking out someone who's had a few fights and lost them all, in my opinion. But yeah, Okolie will certainly be one to watch and certainly one to will follow on this channel as his professional career progresses. So, guys, yeah, that's my thoughts on the fights this week. I'm going to give a quick word. The observant amongst you will notice that there was a new intro to this video, and also the logo on the channel has been updated. It may not show as updated immediately because apparently it can take up to a day or so to show, but the logo has been updated in line with the new intro video. I've also got a new banner that I've had created, which will replace the wallpaper banner, which adorns currently the homepage of the channel. That will probably be finalised in the next 24 to 48 hours. So yeah, we're experimenting with a new look, trying to do things a little more professionally as the channel grows. I want to give a quick shout out on this video. I've got 3 individuals who support the channel on Patreon, and a link to that is in the description below. And the money that they put in through Patreon has paid for the majority of getting that logo done and getting the new banner done and getting the intro video done. So I want to give a massive thanks to those people. Next step, which hopefully can be achieved in the next month or so, is to get a new microphone, maybe even get a new camera, and yeah, just try and slowly but surely make the channel slightly more professional. It's only a hobby for me. It's not a profession, as you guys know, but it's slowly building a bit of momentum, and it's it's nice to take things a little bit more seriously. So I hope you guys like the new intro. Do drop me a comment, let me know your thoughts on it, and let me know your thoughts on the new logo. I didn't want to make it too long because I know it can be frustrating to sit through a minute-long intro. So yeah, it is what it is. But let me know your thoughts on that. And as I say, shout out to the people who helped make that possible. But yeah, there we go, guys. Well, I've rambled on now. This video is probably going to be over half an hour long when it's fully uploaded. But yeah, just in brief summary, Jorge Linares, a world-class performance against an overmatched Anthony Crolla. Key question for me is, will Anthony Crolla come again to try and regain his world title, or will we start to see him being used as an underdog? Will we start to see him being fed to Luke Campbell? Will we see him moving up to 140 and fighting in an unnatural weight class to get a fight against Ricky Burns? Let me know your thoughts. Where do you think Crolla goes next? Do you think he can rebuild, take an 8-rounder and then fight Terry Flanagan, or are you sceptical that fight will happen like myself because of the politics? Drop me a comment on that. Lawrence Okolie, drop me a comment on what you think of Okolie. Jack Arnfield, he beat Brian Rose. Let me know if you collected on that double like I did, the Linares Armfield double. What did you make of Armfield's performance? How high can he go in the sport? Let me know about Martin Ward. Let me know what's going on with him. How high do you think his upside is? Are you, like me, sharing some frustrations with his career? And talk to me about that Marcus Morrison fight. Should Joe Gallagher start the fight? What was going on there? Will Morrison come again, or do you think that's the last we're going to see of him? This has been a longer video, so we've played around with this a few times before. I'm going to give the name of a fighter. If you've watched all the way through, let me know by leaving a comment about this particular fighter. Let us go with... I'm just trying to think of a particularly entertaining character. Let's go with Evander Holyfield. Yeah, if you've watched all the way through and are hearing this now, drop me a comment on Evander Holyfield, and it'd be a little experiment to see how many people sit through the whole of these extended rambling, ranting, long videos, or whether I should maybe stick to the 2-minute ones. But yeah, leave your comments below, guys. Give me your feedback on the new logo, the new intro. Keen to hear if you guys like it. Drop your comments in the section below. If you've enjoyed it, please hit the thumbs up button. Helps me get some more visibility to the channel. And do take the time to press subscribe. I'm trying to grow out the channel, continue to grow some numbers. So if you like what I'm doing, please press subscribe. As always, massively appreciate you guys tuning in. Thanks for choosing to watch my thoughts on it.